You're listening to WCAT Radio, your home for authentic Catholic programming.
Welcome to The Open Door, a show based on the words in Revelation, "I have left an open door before you, which no one can close." This is WCAT Radio's longest-running show, which opened the door to the radio station in October 2016. It's currently offered by Jim Hanink, Mario Ramos Reyes and friends, and remains open to the love of God in its call to build a culture of life and a just social order through the panel's discussion of the Catholic social teaching principles of solidarity, subsidiarity, and economic democracy. The Open Door also explores nonviolence, distributism, and communitarianism. So join us at the Open Door, where you too can be part of the conversation.
Welcome, friends, to the Open Door. Jim Hanink here with fellow panelist Valierie Niemeyer. Today, we interview Lauren Onak, the new vice presidential candidate of the American Solidarity Party. She was born and raised in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. Lauren studied English literature at Barnard College of Columbia University and received a master's in adolescent education from Hunter College. Lauren is a stay-at-home mom to 3 young children and lives in the Boston suburbs. She teaches natural family planning and is active in several community organizations. As always, let's begin in prayer. Come, Holy Spirit, fill the hearts of the faithful and kindle in them the fire of your love. Send forth your Spirit, and they shall be created, and you shall renew the face of the earth. O God, who have taught the hearts of the faithful by the light of the Holy Spirit, grant that in the same Spirit we may be truly wise and ever rejoice in his consolation. Through Christ our Lord. Amen. Amen. Lauren, if we may, can you share some of your backstory with us way back, even before you joined the American Solidarity Party?
Sure. Thanks so much, Jim and Valierie, for having me on. I've been looking forward to this conversation. Yeah, I'd love to share my story. My political journey really goes back all the way to my college years. I attended Barnard College, as you mentioned, a very feminist women's college, and actually sort of surprisingly came into a deeper understanding of my faith and joined the pro-life movement through my involvement with the Catholic community there. So we were blessed to have chaplains who were very knowledgeable about the faith, who were willing to answer tough questions for young people. And at the time, when living in New York City and those years after college, I was part of sort of a group of conservative intellectuals sort of gathered around the First Things publication. Father Newhouse preached at our university and at Sunday Mass. And so really sort of learning as I went, and sort of thought, this is the future of the Republican Party right here. And that turned out not to be the case so much. Obviously things changed quickly, and I sort of withdrew from political discussions and was getting married, having kids. And by the time I sort of came back up for air after my first 2 were born, found the political landscape looking a lot bleaker than I had hoped. So yeah, I joined the American Solidarity Party in early 2021. And I logged onto a meeting, got a call the next day asking if I wanted to lead the Massachusetts state chapter. So that's
dangerous. Those meetings are dangerous.
They are so dangerous. And this has always happened. So, and now I'm on the vice presidential ticket. So just be careful, when you join these small groups.
I love it. Well, and then fast forward not that long, actually, you were invited to consider a very weighty proposition, and that is to be the running mate of Peter Sonski as the vice presidential candidate for our party. Tell us about your discernment process. I mean, it's a very weighty thing to say yes to as in your season in life. And I really would love to hear about your discernment process in that.
Yeah. And Valierie, that I reached out to you during that because I really consider you a mentor to me in the party. And I was initially learning about Peter's campaign, and a lot of it was becoming comfortable with his judgment. So as I started participating in the campaign in the earlier season way back in February now, I could see that he was someone who took other people's input seriously. He was always reaching out to supporters asking, what did you think about the way I phrased this? Or, do you think there could be a better way I could do this? Who do you think I should reach out to next? And I really appreciated how realistic but professional he was. Realistic in the sense of, okay, we're not moving to Washington, D.C. next year, but professional in the sense that he was going to put the weight of his influence and his mind behind this. And so even though, I was initially approached early on saying, hey, you're going to be the right age. We need a vice. Will you consider being on the list? And I thought about that seriously because as I'm sure we all face, from the left or the right, people in our communities who would be not pleased to see our name on a yard sign. Thinking about my husband and how it would impact him and my children. I sort of took a while to think about it. I have a sort of unique situation this year in that my two older kids are starting full-time school. My youngest is still a baby and he naps, and I have more flexibility than I've had in years in my schedule. We're finally settled here in a home in Massachusetts. And, with the pandemic finally being over, I just have so much more flexibility and freedom than I feel like I've had in a long time. I joke that this is my first time 6 years into parenting, feeling like I'm having a normal experience of infancy, given a special needs baby the first round and then a COVID baby the next baby. So this baby feels like the first normal experience of mothering an infant, which has been wonderful. And so I prayed about it, talked to my husband about it, but I also don't want anyone to think that I have some, special, unique qualities that make me particularly qualified for this. It really was a matter of feeling like Peter had good judgment and trusting his judgment, and also, being just sort of, following the lead of the Holy Spirit and knowing that, God doesn't call the qualified, he qualifies the called. And you just kind of have to, I knew it was going to be a learning experience going into it, is what I'm trying to say. So I was just happy to bring my strength to the table for the party because it's something that I care really deeply about.
Yeah. Well, I know you reached out to me, which was touching that you reached out to invite me to pray a novena with you to the Sacred Heart. That was about the time that we were preparing for the delegate convention, and all this was sort of maybe finalizing in your process of discernment. Did you decide during that novena or before that novena, and we're just praying for strength to kind of in guidance? Or
it was funny. So I think when I first reached out to you, I was still waiting on a final decision from Peter. And then I believe it was during the novena that he called and said, I've made my decision. And yeah, and it was and it was great to just be praying for the convention too. That was, we really just, I knew we needed to be focused and praying for that. But I was so happy that you were able to sort of give me your take and join me in that prayer. That was awesome.
Well, I sure appreciated the invitation to pray with you. So thank you for that.
Lauren, the Solidarity Party believes strongly in the principle of subsidiarity. And that principle is a central principle in Catholic social thinking. But not everybody knows what subsidiarity is. In fact, probably most people don't know what subsidiarity is. They might know the expression, a wholly owned subsidiarity of, but what exactly is the principle of subsidiarity, and how do you explain it to people?
Yeah, so I am not a policy wonk or a political scientist. So definitely, I try to explain things in my own words, and you guys should definitely chime in with your thoughts too. But subsidiarity is this idea that issues can be taken care of at the level closest to the people affecting them. It's not always the best way to do things, but it's a preferred way. So what I like about subsidiarity is we kind of have these arguments about small government, big government, and this is a more nuanced take on things where, yes, if we can solve issues at the local level, if we can work on them in communities, that makes sense. It's a way of governance. There are times when the state needs to intervene or sort of oversee, and that's okay too. But the party sort of advocates for these local level, this local level governing. And one resource that someone sent me recently on this topic was sort of saying it's not an argument against more politics, but it's an argument for the fact that the local orders know your needs better, know you better. And it's actually a way to influence, to have greater influence because you're being influenced by entities that you're closer to. So I think this is one of the reasons why as a party, we're really starting to emphasize having people run on the local level with the party name, just getting our name out there and not considering that any kind of lower task or concession, but just something that really will change hearts and minds in your town. It's actually a really privileged place of influence, I think, for party members.
Let me offer you a California case. In Los Angeles County, there are, by a recent count, 75,000 homeless people. That's a lot. And there are a number of reasons for their being homeless. And one reason is the cost of housing. You can have people that are dealing with mental health issues and addiction issues. And if housing is accessible, they can still get an apartment someplace, usually. But they can't here. Now, one measure to deal with homelessness is to have more accessible housing. And one way to do that is to change zoning laws that make certain neighborhoods single residential neighborhoods only. Now, usually what happens when a move is made in that direction is that the local community resists it. So various strategies are employed. Here in my neck of the wood in Los Angeles, which is really Inglewood, California, the change in zoning is focused along main streets that run for miles and miles. And the idea is if we could have more apartment buildings along these streets, the traffic at least will be manageable, and we'll have more housing, plain and simple. But we've got to replace these single units with some apartment buildings. Now, this is we on the Open Door specialize in this. This is a pop quiz question.
Mm-hmm.
How would somebody committed to subsidiarity begin to approach this question? Question which in brass tacks terms is, yeah, I know that it's not going to be great to have an apartment building here. But you see over there where there are all these homeless encampments, or you see over here where all these people are living out of their RVs, except they're RVs that you can't really live in because that's the kind of RVs they have. So what are we going to do about that? They got to live somewhere, right? So, Lauren, you've just been asked that question.
Yeah.
You try to tell a joke to deflect the whole thing, but you borrowed the joke from me, and that only elicits suspicion on the part of the audience. So what do you do?
Yeah, it's interesting you bring up that topic, because when I was reading your questions, I was thinking about a situation we have here in Massachusetts with housing. We have a lot of NIMBYs, not in my backyard, folks, when it comes to affordable housing in Massachusetts. We don't have the homeless situation that you're facing in LA, but we do have a lot of people who pay a lot of lip service to this idea of affordable housing, but then pass zoning laws about not building in-law suites on their house and not allowing there to be 2 kitchens. So you effectively can't add any like multifamily housing to these areas. And the state of Massachusetts stepped in and said, no, you have to do this. You can't keep using these zoning restrictions to stop building of, and when there are apartment buildings going up, they're luxury apartments, they're for young, working class, they're for young people commuting into the city. They're not necessarily adding anything that's affordable to the community.
It's a coalition of the yuppies and the NIMBYs.
I was going to say, I was looking for the word yuppies. Yes, that's exactly what it feels like. So, what's funny is housing has been one of the issues I feel like I've learned the most about from other members of the party, because it was not something that, had initially drawn me in, but it comes up at almost every New England meeting because it's such an issue here. And it's not even facing the homelessness issue that your state is facing, but just the lack of affordable housing for young families in this general area. So yeah, then it gets down to the common good, right? These people do need a place to live, and it's okay for, and as I mentioned earlier, it's not always the wrong step for the state to come in and sort of, help move things along in the right direction. I mean, we see that with things like the Civil Rights Act. We see that with disability legislation. I have a disabled child, and a lot of the rights that she's given come from federal legislation that then the states have to implement somehow. So So it can be useful for the state to sort of push these things along towards the common good. And it made a lot of people angry here that, Beacon Hill said, you need to start building these sorts of accommodations for people in your towns. But I do think it was the right thing to do, because we're just, the prices are just going up and up. There's no inventory here. So not quite the same situation that you're facing there, but it's definitely something that, there's a lot of NIMBYs sort of putting, making this very difficult. And I was just reading, they wrote a blog post recently about sort of urban planning, and was reading this Suburban Nation, which is not a new book, but was a fascinating read on this topic. And he was talking about how, this sort of diversified housing adds so much value to communities. People expect that their property values are, going to go down and XYZ, but he was talking about, we've studied ratios at which this is helpful to communities. We know how to plan this. It's just that we're not doing it. That was a bit of a rambling answer, but
well, there's so many considerations that we do ramble around, and we'll pull it together little by little. Valierie, did you want to comment on this point?
Well, I just was, I was going to segue to the next question. So if you have something else to say on it, Jim.
Well, since Lauren is a third order Dominican, she is naturally interested in a subject that so few of us are interested in, but that we all ought to be interested in: metaphysics. Now, there is a metaphysics at work in the principle of subsidiarity, which you've aptly described and applied. And the principle in English, I mean, if we have to speak English, the principle is everything realizes its potential in action. Now, in the language of saints and scholars, although they are currently absent from our midst, in the language of saints and scholars, it's omniens, every being. Perficitur is perfected, is realized in actu. Now, how does that connect with the principle of subsidiarity? Things need to have the freedom to be the best selves that they can be. And if everything is decided from above, you lack that freedom. But if things work their way from bottom to top, if we begin with grassroots, there's a maximizing of the range of free action. And it is in free action that we realize our potential. We become the best selves that we can be. So if we talk about child raising, we parents are always thinking, well, they need to be able to do this. Sometimes I have to do it for them, but I can't always do it for them. And let's get the right circumstances and let's have them do it for themselves. So even a prudent person, a really prudent person like Valierie Niemeyer, takes her kids camping in extreme weather conditions, no doubt thinking that they will realize their best selves if they're so challenged. And if we keep coming back to that, it's in acting that we realize our potential. And at a certain level, that leads us to the principle of subsidiarity. Bottom up, not top down. Isn't metaphysics great? Wouldn't you say it's a really great thing?
I just want to tell you, Jim, there's no IQ test to get into the lay Dominican. So while I may aspire to understanding metaphysics, it is sometimes just an aspiration. But you're right. You're exactly right that we want people to be free to choose the good. And if they need some, we're fallen, and times are uncertain, and it's understandable that people, their home is their major asset, right? And they're concerned about the price of, how that's going to fare. And so yeah, it is that, like, helping them choose the good. I would say the suburban Massachusetts version of taking my kids camping in extreme weather is sending them to farm school. So way lamer than Valerie's, but trying at least to get them. They did have to go year round, so they had to face the elements, but it was not overnight, Valierie. So I kudos for that.
Well, I myself thought I was crazy, but I just kept saying, I think I can, I think I can, I think I can. And it was a good experience.
So much of parenting is just thinking you're crazy most of the time, I think. It's
well,
at least for me.
Yeah. Well, thankfully, Grandma and Grandpa showed up with the camper, at about dinner time on day 2. So, and that camper does have AC. So it was a nice relief that, but so I'm thinking about, this idea that we have to be free to choose the good, right? And then we also have to care to choose the good. We have to care about our neighbors, we have to care about people that are maybe less advantaged than us. And so this idea that, well, how do you get a community to get from not in my backyard to I want to be a part of a solution for my fellow humans in my community? How what's the relationship between subsidiarity and strong communities,
Yeah. I feel like my involvement with ASP has actually pushed me into so many more of these sort of community-based actions and organizations. So I think, educating the electorate becomes really as simple as forming a group text with a bunch of local moms about issues, that are going to be coming up on the ballot, but then adding in all these other elements that they're not aware of. I think women of our generation, and, especially moms, I find have so much just withdrawn from politics. They find it so acrimonious, so bitter that they don't even, one mom told me, I don't even want to know. We were talking about a specific topic and I don't want to know what they think, but it's not realistic. It's not, unless you're a monk or a hermit, we are called to engage in these issues. And so what that's looked like for me, and what I think, one of the goals of this campaign, at least for me personally, but I think Peter feels this way as well, is just to have Christians and people of goodwill, and, especially these disaffected younger folks, feel that it's a good idea to get plugged back in, that there is hope. And so one of the ways, it's funny, I was just, so I help organize a group of special needs moms within the local moms club. So we have this large community-based moms club. In here we have, we're fortunate to have people who are pretty, educated on certain issues, but we were talking about standardized testing and how they're trying to get rid of that as a diploma requirement in Massachusetts. It's a little bit complicated. I won't get into the weeds of it, but they were asking how can we organize for this? How can we help gather signatures? I said, hey, we're a block right here. There's 15 of us here. We're plugged into this larger moms club organization. If we tell them these are the issues our kids are facing, and then in addition, we mobilize other special needs parents who are interested in this. I think people feel like things are so big, problems are so big that we don't have agency anymore. And it's just not the case. So, so everything that I have gotten involved with here and that I think has had political implications, it's always started with these group connections, you know, meeting someone for coffee, sitting down for a beer with someone, and just getting to know them better. And in the case of this particular issue that I'm describing, these are not women who agree with me on many things. I would say, you know, they know, some of them know about the campaign, but we are not in agreement on a lot of various social issues, especially pro-life issues, but there is overlap in certain things that we care about. And, you know, so we're able to find that common ground and advocate for our kids that way. So that's one element of it. And so, you know, in New England, we have these weird town halls, town meetings where we go before the election, and you can actually, it's like our conventions. You can make a motion from the floor. I just have started inviting women, other stay-at-home moms, other working moms, in my community to come. Let's go to these meetings together. Let's learn. And it was funny. One of them showed up with candy and seltzer. We sat and, you know, listened to the whole meeting. You know, these things seem so out of reach. And then when you get involved on the local level, you see, no, I can actually meet the people who are making these decisions. They're not so far from me. And, you know, they are, you know, they want to hear from me. And so that's been great. I mean, never underestimate, as I call it, playground evangelization, you know, just talking to other parents. And
that's a great expression.
It was, yeah, I just don't underestimate that personal touch, I think, is a huge piece. Yeah. So, and don't be afraid to talk about this stuff. I mean, so much of it is nonpartisan too, and can be fruitful discussion.
I think that's really important that we keep in mind and front and center that we really do have a lot of common ground with most people. You know, we have more in common than we have in terms of differences, you know, in our humanity and in our desire for the good life and in our struggles. You know, there's so much that we have in common. So I appreciate that you highlighted that, just seeking common ground. And that's a great starting point for building community, for building strong communities, is mobilizing together on those things that we can all agree are really important. So we have this, subsidiarity is one of the big ideas of the ASP that we're really promoting, but also solidarity. So I'm thinking, you know, in your examples, these are the people that you're rubbing elbows with. These are the people that you touch lives with. And then you're seeking out opportunities to connect with people that are making decisions and whatnot. In my life, I have found, you know, I had the opportunity to live in Latin America, you know, with a poor family. I had an opportunity to enter into the lives of people that were dramatically different from my own in terms of their advantages in life, their material life, also the gifts that they had that I didn't find in my own community and culture. But one thing that's more challenging I have found through the years is entering into the experiences of people in my own city, right? So, for instance, you know, I don't really know what it is to grow up in a poor neighborhood, you know, or in a racial minority neighborhood. I can't experience and feel and I'm not invited in, if you will. I want to be able to experience more of a solidarity with folks who maybe the homeless or whatever. And there are ways to seek that out, but there are limitations too. And I think just naturally as humans, it's really hard to be in solidarity, which is another one of the key principles, when we don't know. I mean, half the battle is just coming to know the journey and the struggles and the disadvantages, and to appreciate what people are dealing with, in terms of what they're coming up against and the obstacles. And so for you, how do we bridge those, because you can't have a strong community. You can't even do subsidiarity in terms of, well, if we're going to get help from a higher level of government to be able to implement something that for our community, is really going to make a difference, well, you really need to have, you really need to be in relationship with and have a sense of solidarity with those and bring them into the conversation and have these encounters. How do you live that out? Can you give us some examples of how you see we can sort of live out personally and collectively the virtue of solidarity, and maybe give us some examples of where you've seen that or would like to see that more on different levels, because we've got poor people across the globe, and we've got poor people maybe even on our street, right? How do we live? How do you see living solidarity practically speaking?
It's such a big question. And one thing that you said that I think is really important, like when you're talking about those who are, racially or economically in a different, different situation than you're in, it's like holding space for what we don't know about them. Like this is one of the things that when people sort of assume easy answers to questions on race, for example, it's like, you're right. I don't have that experience of growing up as a minority. I don't have that experience of growing up in a poor household. And I need to hold space for the fact that there are things I don't know. And I, in humility can seek out those answers. I think one thing that is really interesting about, being a part of the American Solidarity Party, there are a lot of negatives to interacting with people online as a medium. But one thing that I've found about myself that's really interesting is that you make assumptions, and then because you don't know these people, their full story, and then you find out things about their backgrounds, and you realize, oh, this is where they're coming from here. Like this is what's driving them to this kind of argument. And I have, been humbled many times by those assumptions that I've made, and finding out that people are, actually coming from a place of struggle or some kind of economic disadvantage or what have you. So that's been really interesting for me. So how can we grow in solidarity? I mean, I don't even know that I have the best answers to this question, but I do believe in the power of conversation. I do believe in, finding those sort of places and community spaces where you can interact with people who are different from yourself. I think churches, even though, religiously you're there for the same reason, but I found this was interesting for me in college. When I first arrived, I found that I went to women's college, the young women sort of grouped themselves off into these very like homogenous groupings. And it wasn't until I got involved with the Catholic ministry, I started to meet international students. I started to meet students from different backgrounds than myself. So having that place where you can meet people who share common interests but have different backgrounds than you, I think is so important. And we can think about other places like that. I mean, the party is a place like that, right? It's a place for people that hold common things in common, but don't necessarily come from the same places, the same backgrounds. And I think, inviting those people into the decision-making process and those conversations is really important too. So examples I've seen, that those are definitely some examples. And it just, I think it can be, very difficult to kind of do what you're talking about, like bringing someone else's lived experience to the mass. I find even when I travel, to see my husband's family in a culture that's not so different from our own, in Eastern Europe, but there are enough cultural differences. It's so hard for me to even adjust to that small level of change. So, I think I'm learning, my own biases and how they come out. And so I don't know that I have a perfect answer.
What? You're not going to solve the world's problems here, like with your perfect ideas?
You'll have to come back next week.
Yeah. Well, I think I was going to say, I just, just in my life, for instance, choosing to live we live in a kind of an urban versus suburban area. And I don't want to say urban because there's not tall buildings in our area, but just more diverse. I mean, I think one thing can be just, again, there's a movement. I think somebody in our party posted about Flamingo Fridays, where like get out on your porch more, take walks, put yourself in a position to encounter and grow in relationship with neighbors. Neighbors have, even if we don't live in as diverse a neighborhood, growing in community and solidarity, means having encounters. And I think Pope Francis, talks about that a lot, like a culture of encounter. Mm-hmm. So not only do we need to, because I've heard somebody mention something about, suburban life and just you pull your car into your garage, you close the garage door behind you. And very often we're not interacting even with our immediate neighbors. And so I think I liked what you said about finding and creating community spaces in which this encounter can happen. And even it just might be going and volunteering at a shelter or, a ministry that's ministering to the homeless. If we put ourselves in a position to encounter and know and love a poor person, then all of a sudden our solidarity with the poor everywhere, our sense of solidarity and relationship, can increase. So I think that too is part of the equation, but I appreciated your thoughts. Sorry, go ahead, Jim.
Yeah, sorry.
No, that's okay. You can feel free to add.
I was just going to say that it was funny moving to New England after, sort of being in New York City, which has this reputation for being unfriendly. Moving to New England during a pandemic was really interesting. We did not meet some of our neighbors for a long time. And so I always sort of juxtapose it to my upbringing in the South and, how friendly everyone is there when you move in, people, come and meet you. But it was funny, I was just visiting my parents with my family, and it is so hot in the summer that you don't linger outside at all. You just run straight in. So we had no conversations with their neighbors while I was visiting. But I do think you're right. I do feel that the aftermath of the pandemic has given us this new chance to meet the people around us in like a really intentional way, to bring back things as simple as meal trains and, hosting, sitting in your front yard with popsicles for the kids and just turning on your sprinkler and letting, if your town lets you, mine does not, letting, people come up and greet you. And it has given us, I think, a chance to really dive into that again. And I think it's a good opportunity, especially for those of us who might be a little more prone to be inward facing, to just say, no, let's bring this back. Let's not stay in that isolation. Let's try to mingle.
Let me in a way, go back to our discussion of common ground, what we share, and then push ahead a little bit with this theme of personal responsibility. My family has lived in a very diverse neighborhood for at least 40 years. And there are people that hold all sorts of views. And I've gotten to know all sorts of neighbors. And I've discovered that there's always common ground on 2 points: the importance of good dental hygiene and sensible footwear. And I've been able to build gradually, very gradually, on those 2 pillars. That was one point I wanted to make.
Thank you for sharing your wisdom.
Now, moving forward, I know Valierie is very interested in the Catholic Worker and Dorothy Day, and I have long been interested as well. One of the things that Dorothy Day always would emphasize is personal responsibility. Always, always, always. She was well aware of subsidiarity and well aware of solidarity, but personal responsibility. And when you act out of personal responsibility, you very often find a whole lot of your time given over to people who are very close to you, very much at hand, very much in the neighborhood. In fact, getting back to the common doctor, Thomas Aquinas, one of his central arguments for private property is if property is held privately, then people can privately exercise personal responsibility and take care of people, help people that are immediately at hand with them. You don't have to file forms with social services. You know that so-and-so down the block needs such and such, and you do it today, not tomorrow. And recognizing this, towards the end of her life, when asked if she would do things differently, one of the things that Miss Day said was, I'd stay smaller. Now, that's ironic because the Catholic Worker is, in many respects, spread in every English-speaking country across the world, at least in every English-speaking country. But she'd say, thinking back, I'd stay smaller. And she was always encouraging people to start houses of hospitality, but she said, and not so many of them would be necessary if everyone had a Christ room. Mm-hmm. That is to say, a place in our own homes that we could have people who are in immediate need can stay starting today. And that links, of course, with solidarity. One of my favorite ways of explaining solidarity is that it's the view that the most significant measure of justice in any society is how the least well-off, the most vulnerable, how they're treated. That's the first measure of justice. The analogy would be if you're on a lifeboat, who's about to fall off? Grab them. That's the first thing you do. So now, a difficulty with all of that is, and I've certainly seen this happen, you can wind up putting yourself in a position where you're almost as bad off as the people that you're helping. Maybe you still have a savings account somewhere and they don't have anything to save anywhere, but you can get stretched out of shape, bent out of shape, and burned out totally. I don't know, as you campaign and campaign and campaign, you might have moments like that. I wonder if any of this this ramble of my own is something that you would like to connect with.
You're talking about Christ rooms. And I'm just thinking, I can't help but think of, we just got back from my husband's family, who are all in Poland, and how a large group of them found they did have space for refugees coming from the Ukraine. And when we were there, we were visiting a dear friend of mine, one of my campus chaplains who's since moved back to Poland, Dominican friar. And they had a lot of extra space. The rectory where they lived had formerly been a house of studies, and they had just finished moving out the last of the Ukrainian families that had been living there since the beginning of the conflict. So it is interesting to me that even though that was such a dramatic situation, and you don't want it to have to be that dramatic for people to open up their homes necessarily, but it was this beautiful example of finding the space, which I find in my in-laws all the time. Yeah, we can fit another person at this table or in this room. Where? Can we really? Because there's 11 people living in this house right now. But it is really beautiful. And yeah, I'm also a huge admirer of Dorothy Day. I wrote about her in my college Common App admissions essay, thinking I knew all about her as a 17-year-old, and I'm still learning. But she is, and she is just definitely someone that I take to heart. And in terms of burnout, that is definitely real. I mean, right, Valierie, even with the party, we experience that in our involvement sometimes, that we need to take a step back. So I can totally relate to that. Peter has made it clear, we need to prioritize our families, right? This is important, but it's not the most important thing about our lives for the next 15 months, for sure.
That's a long trail that you're campaigning on.
No, it's longer than other campaigns, right? Having the ticket so early, which we have to do for ballot access, it's a third party, but it is a long commitment.
I appreciated, since we're talking so much about subsidiarity, that tension. And I've thought about this too. You mentioned being over-involved or over-committed, outside of the family. And that's always, always, always a tension. I think we perpetually have to struggle with that, like how to balance our commitment outside of our homes to our communities more broadly, and also within our homes. But I thought, subsidiarity kind of does relate to this, even just in a personal way. Like if we think about, higher versus lower levels of government, or we'll also, like Jim, like you said, at hand, if we think about beginning with who we are called, personal responsibility, who our duties are to, who is most at hand, and thinking about the way we live subsidiarity and our commitments and our callings is you start with that which is closest to you, and that is your family, and then your neighborhood, your church community, and then to this maybe municipal level, then to the state level. Not that we aren't some people called to work very much on this level. Like right now in this season, you're feeling a call, you've discerned a call to work sort of in this national stage level, right? But as a kind of like, that would be kind of the extraordinary calling. But ordinarily, I think that subsidiarity can give us a sense too of where we are called to exercise our personal responsibility, our duty to care and to encounter and to live solidarity, primarily closest to us and then out from there. But yeah, I think that's helpful to me.
Yeah,
personally.
It is. It's that Mother Teresa quote of "Go home and love your family." that people talk about. And you're right, there is a big tension for the modern parent and the modern mom, I think, especially about how do we balance this. Obviously, our primary commitment is to our families. But how do we balance all of the good things that we're being asked of? Sometimes it's saying no to good things, and that's okay. But it is truly something I see a lot of women discerning, and there's a lot of nuance to it. There's a lot of understanding that, and I'm preaching to the choir because you know this very well, being more, further ahead on the motherhood journey than I am, that so much of it is stages. You find these pockets of time at these strange parts of parenting, and then suddenly they're gone and you don't have the time anymore, and it's so
and you missed the nap.
If you skip that nap, you're dead. You're toast, right? The house is not getting cleaned. So yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it doesn't look the same for each woman, for each family, for each season. And that's, I think honoring other people's callings and journeys, but also always coming back to this sense that you can't have strong communities without strong families, and you can't have strong families without strong moms. So what is it where, are we also, self-care is really important, like recognizing our own limitations and needs, and receiving, and not trying to live out this journey on our own either, like not isolating. Like, we need community as well. We need our family. We need our neighbors. We need other moms who are struggling with some of the same things. So again, this call to be interdependent,
Yes.
especially with God, right? Like, and I think we have to recognize not only the limitations of society, of government, of communities, of, but our own limitations, and speaking of burnout and whatnot, at some point, and this is where metaphysics really comes in, right? We have to recognize that we mustn't allow ourselves to become overwhelmed and shut down and discouraged because of what we cannot, because of those things that are out of our control, and that we have to entrust people and society and the world to the Lord's care, but all the while not ceasing to step up and do our part, the things that are at hand for us in my particular space in life, in my particular spot on this big spinning earth,
Amen. Yes. Preach it, Valierie. I totally agree. And yeah, I'm thinking about another, just to bring up the Dominicans, because Jim already brought them up, but St. Catherine of Siena, God said to her, I am he who is, and you are she who is not. And it's this really just total reliance on him, and realizing all those limitations that you were talking about, which is so humbling and so necessary for parenting, for anything, to just, say, I need help doing this. I mean, right now, a friend is over watching my kids, so I can talk to you guys this morning, and she has 5 kids of her own, and so we need each other. We desperately need each other. I think that is one of the most beautiful things about our party's principles and platform, is that it highlights that need for each other at like every step of the way. And I've just grown to love that so much, but through the past 2.5 years of involvement with the party. That's, I think, one of the most profound but countercultural things that our party can tell people. We need each other.
Yes.
We certainly need our Lord and Savior, and we always end with the gospel for the day, Matthew. At that time, Jesus withdrew to the region of Tyre and Sidon, and behold, a Canaanite woman of the district came and called out, "Have pity on me, Lord, Son of David. My daughter is tormented by a demon." But he did not answer a word to her. His disciples came and asked him, "Send her away, for she keeps calling out after us." He said in reply, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." But the woman came and did homage, saying, "Lord, help me." He said in reply, "It's not right to take the food of the children and throw it to the dogs." She said, "Please, Lord, for even the dogs eat the scraps that fall from the table of their masters." Then Jesus said to her in reply, "O woman, great is your faith. Let it be done for you as you wish." And her daughter was healed from that hour. Come, Lord Jesus, come. Thank you so much, Lauren. We enjoyed speaking with you.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Valierie. This was great.
Hello, God's beloved. I'm Annabelle Mosley, author, professor of theology, and host of Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. I invite you to listen in and find inspiration along this sacred journey we're traveling together to make our lives a masterpiece and, with God's grace, become saints. Join me, Annabelle Mosley, for Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. God bless you. Remember, you're never alone. God is always with you.
Thank you for listening to a production of WCAT Radio. Please join us in our mission of evangelization. And don't forget, love lifts up when knowledge takes flight.